Hello, good evening everyone. It's David from MD Bootstrap, and today we're gonna learn about Sass, which is CSS with super powers. As always, we are streaming to two platforms simultaneously, so to the Facebook and to the YouTube, and we're gonna wait a few seconds to let everyone join. I hope you are doing okay, guys. Let me know who is with me tonight. I can see already people joining. So we're gonna start shortly, and today we're gonna learn about Sass, which is a superset of CSS. So, well, some people says that if you don't like CSS itself, then definitely you're gonna like it after you learn Sass, as it's making it's much easier and it's much more efficient to use. And if you already like CSS, then you're gonna probably like it even more. So we're gonna wait a few more seconds. Just to remind you, you can already download our lesson files from a GitHub repository. So you're gonna find a tutorial. So everything we're gonna cover in this lesson, including all the animated GIFs like this one. So everything is pretty straightforward to follow. So if you lose something, if you somehow lose a plot and you're not gonna you're gonna miss something, don't worry. Everything is first of all recorded, so all the webinars are recorded and they are available for a playback on our YouTube channel, and the tutorial itself in a written version is also available for you on the GitHub repository. So without further ado, let's start learning how to use Sass. Let me just send you guys a link to the tutorial itself. Hello, Vladimir. It's nice to see you as always. I have to admit that it's really it's awesome feeling when I see I'm doing these webinars. It's already 10th webinar in a row, and you guys been with me for 10 webinars in a row. So that's really amazing, and I really appreciate it. Just to remind you, we have a Facebook group where you can join, where you can find all the materials and other tutorials. And if you have any issues, you can always get there and post your question. Okay, so as I said, without further ado, let's just jump into our code. So as always, we're gonna just start with creating a new empty project, and it's called Sass project. And I'm gonna open this in Visual Studio Code. And let me just remind you that if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask them, to post them at any time, and I'm gonna answer them. Either immediately if they're related to the subject of our lesson, and if they are not, then I'm gonna stay after the learning part, which will take briefly about an hour, and I'm gonna answer all questions you might possibly have. Okay, guys. So in order to start, we have to first install Sass. So there are multiple ways to do it. If you go to the Sass website, so the project website, you will find that there are different ways to install it, and most of them are, there are two main options. So you can either install an application on your PC or Mac, and as you can see, some of them are free, some of them are paid. The other option is to use a command line. So basically to install it as an npm dependency. We learned about npm in the last tutorial last week, so you already know how to use it. But there is a third option as well, which is the most simple. It's the simplest. So and this is what we're gonna use for today, and we're gonna use a Visual Studio extension. So if you use Visual Studio Code, which I strongly recommend for you, then you can go to extensions, which is Ctrl+Shift+X, and search for live Sass compiler. And once you get there, you will be able to install it. I already installed it, but this is pretty straightforward. Let me show you. I recorded this for you. So as you can see, this GIF shows you how to install it. So live Sass compiler, find it, and just click install, and this will install in just a few seconds. So that's it, as simple as that. So if you are following with me, just you can just do it right away. Now, once it's installed, we're gonna get some new features in Visual Studio Code. Let me just let you know that it might require to restart your instance of Visual Studio Code, so you just may need to restart it. Okay, now once we have it, let's put our hands on a keyboard and start typing. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna create an index.html file, and we're gonna put this starting code over here. And this code, by the way, I mean, as you can see, it's very simple. It's just generic HTML page. Let me remind you that you can just press exclamation mark and then press tab. It will create this basic structure. The one which I'm using actually comes from our previous webinar, one of the first webinars when we've been learning how to create a web page, a very first web page in HTML, CSS. So if you remember, let me find this one, HTML and CSS tutorial. So we've been doing this page with HTML and CSS, and today we're gonna do the same page with, I'm gonna show you on the same example. I'm gonna show you how to use Sass. Vladimir is asking, but is Sass not included in MDB Bootstrap Pro? It is, and you're gonna show it, so the CSS files are there. And I hope that you're gonna understand why. I mean, this is like kind of must-have for any bigger project. Okay, guys. So as you can see, what we have here, we are linking to a styles CSS file, which is obviously not there yet. But the interesting part starts now. Let's create a new file, but instead of calling it style CSS, let's call it style SCSS. Now, once we have that, let me increase the font for you. Once we have that, let me write some styles over here. So I'm gonna type nothing fancy, just color blue, and look at this. Here in the bottom right side of the Visual Studio Code, you're gonna see this Watch Sass button, and when you're gonna click it, it will start watching this style SCSS file, and it's gonna generate two files for us. So it's a style CSS and style CSS map. We're not gonna cover CSS map. It's a little bit more advanced. It's not important at the moment, but as you can see, our style CSS got created, and our style is here. So now obviously this should work. So I'm gonna use live server. So I'm gonna open this with live server, and let's see whether it works. Let's check this one. We have P here. Okay, let me divide window. Let me close this one. Let me check why this doesn't work. So we have a body. Hold on. We have body, we have heading, we have P class, and it doesn't get applied. Hold on, why it's so P paragraph. and it's not loading style CSS. Oh, obviously I made a typo. We don't have style. It's called styles. It should be called styles. So I'm gonna rename this one. I'm gonna remove this one, and I'm gonna click watch Sass again. This will create style CSS, and now our paragraphs are blue as expected. And this is a moment where we're gonna stop for a second, because we're gonna talk a little bit about syntax, because there are two syntax options which you can use while working with Sass, and I'm gonna quickly explain you what's the difference between those two. So let's have a look at this one. So when it comes to Sass, there are two options to use it. So one is SCSS file, which has this SCSS extension, which we are using at this very moment. And personally, I prefer this one, as this is more like it's like a CSS, right? I mean, it's using the same curly brackets and so on, which basically means that I see that some issues with the streaming. Okay, I think we are back. So let me know, guys, if everything is working fine on YouTube and Facebook, because I got some notification about the quality, but I hope it's getting better now. I'm gonna continue. Let me know if everything is working fine for you now. So this is like more CSS option, and what you've seen already is that any valid CSS is also a valid Sass. So it's pretty much the same. The other option is to use this SASS, which use indents. So any one of you which is familiar, is familiar with languages like Python, should be, I mean, perhaps might like this one a little bit more. So here we are using this indents and we don't use curly brackets, but as I mentioned, this SCSS seems to be more nature way of using it, especially for those who are already familiar with CSS. So this is what we're gonna use in today's webinar. Okay, guys, so we have it now. So now let's learn about first feature of Sass, one of the, I believe, actually they are all very important, which you're gonna find very soon, but this one seems to be one of the most important. So, and what I'm thinking of is our variables. So as I said, Sass is CSS with superpowers, and actually, well, to be honest, sometimes back, I mean a few years back, when Sass was released, this was very new and very something totally new. Currently, we can also use variables in CSS. So we can use CSS variables. That's also possible. And let me just quickly show you how to do that. So CSS variables. So if you see, this is the way we can use this variables like this one, and then we use it like that. But well, to be honest, it's not as I don't know, handy as in Sass. Plus Sass offers us much more than variables, so that's why even though the CSS offers variables, I still do recommend use of Sass for that matter. Okay, so let's see how we can use variables in our project. So we're gonna start with defining a variable. We are doing this with $definition. So let's say we're gonna define my color, we're gonna define our variable color, and let's say we're gonna give some hex variable here. I have something prepared before webinar, and now we're gonna say that we want to have our body background color to use this variable. Okay, I forgot to put semicolon at the very end. Now we have it here. Now what is interesting is that, as you can see, what compiler does is compiling our CSS code to SCSS, and obviously we don't have this variable anymore, so so it's not being propagated to the final file. And now let's see if this actually works. And as you can see, our background has changed to a blue color. Now, why is it actually important? It's well, as you can imagine, most of the pages, they use some theme color, and it's not like a single color, it's a definition of colors. So it's like, you know, you have this like primary color, secondary color, background color, some accent color, and if you are creating some website from scratch, you're gonna find this very, very useful. So for example, there are color generators like this one, right? So you can just generate some random colors. You can upload some video or image, and it will analyze it, and as you can see, it can offer you a different mix of palettes and colors. And now this is very, very important and very useful, because now you can imagine that if we were to use these variables all around our page, so, you know, applying these 5 different colors like this one all over around our website, and then for some reason we decide to change it a little bit, or designer decide to change it to make it lighter or darker or whatsoever, then we would have to go through all our files or our classes and update this value of a color like we've seen before, right? So we have this one. So we would have to go and manually update it. Now, as you can see, it isn't an issue anymore, because what we have to do is we just have to use our variables, and then as a result, if we want to change it, we just need to change it in a very single place, and this will get updated everywhere. The other interesting thing is that, you know, these variables are also very widely used in different pages and different libraries, like Bootstrap itself. So if you go to Bootstrap, you're gonna see something like this. So this is a definition of some Bootstrap also uses variables as well as MD Bootstrap. So if you just don't like you know, the default one, you can easily adjust existing configuration to your own, to something which you like, something which you prefer more than the default one. And this is something which a lot of projects do actually. And obviously we can use these variables for any property in a CSS. So for example, we can define like font stack, and let's say I want to use this courier new, and then we want to say that we want this font family to be a font stack, and this will change our font to something like that. Now, the other interesting thing about variables are something which is called maps, and they're more like arrays or objects from JavaScript. So if you are familiar with JavaScript objects, then you will kind of fill it naturally. So the other option to define variables or set of variables is to use maps, and we are defining maps like this. So we're gonna say colors, and then we're gonna define our primary color, and we're gonna give it some value. I have something prepared over here. Then we're gonna have our accent color, let's say, which gonna have some other value. Or actually, let me just copy paste this one, and as you can see, we have this set of colors in one place, so it's more organized. And now when we want to use this color, then what we're gonna do, instead of using this variable like this, we will use something with some functions which is called map get, and we're gonna say we want to get from colors map and the value which we are looking from, which is background in our case. So let's save it, and let's see that our background has actually changed. Let me close this one, as it's interrupting. Oh, this is some tracking up. Yes, turn off tracking for today. And hide widget, let's say for an hour. Okay, apologies for that. Okay guys, so now we have variable and maps covered. So now let's move to the next important part, which is nesting. And what nesting does, actually we're gonna see it very soon on an example. I think that's gonna be better. Now let's have a look at our index HTML. So obviously when we are using our styles, when you're using our classes, when we are trying to style any of the components, we would like to be as specific as possible, so we don't affect other elements, right? When we are building our website or some component or whatever, or library like MD Bootstrap, we don't want to interfere with others' classes, other elements. So you can imagine a situation where like two libraries are using the same class, like I don't know, heading, let's say, which is a very common name, obvious name to use. So if we would have like two classes or two libraries, each one of them in implementing its own styles for heading class, they would just interfere with each other. So that's why we try to be as specific as possible. So for example, if you want to style this heading, we could obviously use either ID, or we could use this class, but we would like to say that we want to style only the title heading, which is under inside this div heading, right? So the other title outside this div won't be affected with this class. And we obviously know how to do it with CSS, but I want to show you how easy and how natural it is for to do it in Sass, because yeah, let's just have a look at this, because I think this picture will be worth more than me talking. So we can simply nest classes or other selectors one under the other. So if we want to style heading inside our body, we can just do it like this. So we're gonna say heading, and we're gonna give some classes to it with like 600 pixels, and then hide 400 pixels. What else we have? Margin, auto. We want to have position. I'm doing these styles because we want to recreate the page from our HTML tutorial. So obviously you don't have to know this or type it, just for us to have a final effect, to show you that we recreated the same page using Sass, and to show you difference between using Sass and style CSS. So now if you're gonna check our style CSS, as you can see, our compiler is taking care of nesting itself, right? So it will just nest this one. And obviously we can nest even we can do multi-level nesting. So we can now, for example, nest some other classes like this title or subtitle underneath the heading, right? So we have like body, heading, title, and they're gonna be automatically translated to all these classes and do all these are so-called combinators, right? So they are defining this one. And obviously we could be even more specific, stating that we want to not only style using class, but we also use the elements, right? So we could say that we want to have this heading with class, and then even if we would have a paragraph with this same class, it won't get affected. So let's see if that works. Let's see if that works for us. It looks that it works fine. So we have this heading centered, we have this title with certain classes, and yeah, it looks pretty cool to me. Okay guys, so the other interesting feature of Sass, which I want to show you today, is a translation option. And again, let me just quickly show you how it works. So I'm gonna add I'm just gonna copy some extra classes from our previous project, and then again, don't bother if you don't understand it. What I want to show you is that we have this transition property over here, but when we check style CSS, we're gonna see that except for the transition, which is also there in a style CSS, we've got something extra, like this WebKit transition. And the reason behind it is that because historically transition was a vendor specific. So we had to create vendor specific attributes. So like Chrome was supporting WebKit transition, and Opera was supporting like O transition, and other browsers were using like other transition. Now, luckily, currently transition is accepted by most of the browser, and it covers like 85% of currently used browsers. So here you can see that 85% of users can support this one, so we don't have to use it anymore. But historically, you had this like transition, WebKit transition, and I'm not sure if I can find some good example because it's historical, but the point is that before all browsers implemented this one, we had to take care of. Here is the good example. Like we have this WebKit, MOS for Mozilla, O for Opera, right? Let me copy paste this one for you to make it more readable. So before we had to take care of it like this. So we were repeating ourselves just to make sure that this will work on all web browsers. And first of all, currently, luckily, with most of the properties, we don't have to do that. But even in cases where we have to, we should do it, because there are still some properties like that. And I'm going to share with it in a couple of seconds. You don't have to do it yourself. It's Sass compiler which will take care of this for you. And yeah, I mean, it's just nice that it's doing that on your behalf. So please just keep in mind. Now there is a question from Vladimir. If you were using Gulp, you would have to set up the gulp.js file to compile CSS from SCSS. You could. Gulp is an automation tool, so you can, this is what Gulp can do for you. So Gulp can, for example, Gulp can basically run this compiler, because obviously now we are using this this tool, this very handy tool, which has a compiler and the watching option. So it's automatically watching our style CSS file as CSS, and it's compiling them every time we save it. So every time I'm making these changes here and I'm saving this file, look what's going on here. Where is my pointer? I want to make it this bigger. Hello. Here it is. So check this one. I'm saving and it's saying like change detected, and then it's generating. So see, it's like doing like this. But obviously, as you've seen before, we can use Sass in a different way. So we can manually type like, you know, compile, and it will compile our code. So this is what Gulp is doing. And also, obviously, Gulp can also compile the code and then minify the CSS. So yeah, technically, yes. Now, the other interesting thing and very handy is option which makes our code less verbose, because it's much easier to define these pseudo classes. So as you can see here, in order to have this hover effect over the button, we have to say this class name again and then type hover. While using Sass, we can replace it with this very simple syntax, which is like ampersand and then just say hover. And this will create this class for us. So let me just copy paste this one here. So I'm just gonna move it. And as you can see, it just created the same output and it's working. Oops. Hold on. It's hover and it shouldn't be here because now this hover got applied to our heading. It should be inside our register. So it should be here, and now it's being applied to our button. Okay, guys. So yeah, as you can see, it's less verbose, and this is also what Sass is. Not only and not mostly, but it's about. It's making our code less verbose, and when we're gonna learn about function. You're gonna see that, yeah, I mean, that's like, you know, few lines of CSS can generate for us like hundreds or thousands lines of CSS, which is just very, very efficient way of doing this. Let me know, is everything clear by now? And meantime, I'm gonna move forward to functions. Just one thing about the pseudo classes is that if we would like to use this after before classes like this, we have to use it like this. So we have after, and then we have, and then we have, oops, and we have this one. I mess up this. I forgot the brackets. Now it's getting after. It's getting it's being added after this one. So for you to notice is that it's double colon over here for after before, and single colon here if we use like hover and other pseudo classes. Okay, so let's move to functions now, which are let's learn something new about functions. So we have this map get here, which is already a handy tool, but let's see how we can make it even more, even easier with use of functions. So we can define our own functions, which can also accept arguments and which can also return some values to us. So now, before, when people were like kind of arguing that HTML and CSS are not actually programming languages because they don't have this kind of logic like functions and variables, so now CSS kind of proves that CSS isn't, but Sass is already kind of a programming language because you can use functions and loops and so on. So let's see how we can do it. In order to specify a function, we have to say just add function. Now function name, function argument, and then we're gonna have our function body. And this very simple function gonna return a value which we have here. So as you can see, we can obviously use, we can also use variables and mixins inside the function. And now, instead of calling this like we've been doing before with map-get, what we have to do, we just have to do like this color, and then say background. Oops, I have some error here. Should I call it? Just give me a sec. This is our project, and where is the error? It's okay. Font family. I forgot some semicolon. Let me check it here. Function return. Let me check it. No, this is color name. Return. Oh, it shouldn't be here. No, it's still an error. Font family, invalid CSS after font family. No, this is function, color name. Let me just check this out. Why don't you like this function here? Oh, not this one, damn. I was looking at the wrong place, obviously. So it was complaining about this font family, and now it's success. Here you can see, by the way, right, that after saving file, you can see the result here, which shows us any issues. And as you also seen, this code, any errors is being shown here in a console. So let's just have a look. Our background didn't change, which means everything works as expected. So as I mentioned before, we can also add some calculation and logics. So for example, we could have this function like this, my calculation, so some number, another number, and we can do this math here. So yeah, I mean, it's useful because you can imagine that we could possibly create very easily like a set of color schemes, or color shades, and so on and so on. So if you see how, for example, Bootstrap is implementing this, I mean, they're like generating a lot of different colors, and you can have like different, you can create classes like rounded border and define different round percentage of it, or the number of pixels. And instead of just creating like 10 different classes for it and typing them manually, you can just create one single function which gonna do it for you. So this is very, very powerful tool. Okay, now talking about functions, we also have to mention mixins, which are well, some sort of functions as well. Now let me give you an example that's gonna be easier. So for example, we very often, when we try to center something, like this one, for example, subtitle, text align. I didn't do it here, but I just did text align. But very often, in order to align something, we are doing this like that. So we have a bunch of code which usually comes together, right? So for example, when we are doing like this position absolute, and then we are doing like top, left, bottom, whatever. So we have this like, some pieces of code which usually comes along, and instead of just again copying and paste the same piece of set of properties, like we could have this set of properties defining our font, for example, right? So we could have like this font weight, font color, font size, and so on and so on. And usually we have like 5-6 different properties defining our font. What we can do is we can create a mixin. So let's have a look at this. Let's create this mixin for this, which we're gonna be called flex align. So in order to create mixin, like you can expect, looking at the function, we just say mixin. By the way, here you can see all the available functions here. So we have like while, for, if functions, and so on. So we really have a lot of logic implemented inside the CSS Sass. So yeah, it's really cool. Now let's create a mixin. So I'm gonna say mixin. I'm gonna give it a name. So I'm gonna say like flex align, and I'm gonna open it, and I'm gonna paste what we just did here. And now in order to use this here, we just have to say add include, and then our mixin name, which is flex align. Let's save it here. It's actually, we don't need to see the preview. Let's just check the style CSS, and we are looking for the subtitle. Oh, it doesn't work. Why? Text align. Hold on. Subtitle 1 of 1. Oh, it doesn't work. That's odd. Mixin flex align. No, that should be working. Let me. Okay. Okay. Now I see why it got wrong. Yeah. So now you can see it. Okay. The reason behind it, or reason it didn't work, was because I made this change to style CSS. So I start typing here something because I was showing you, and now the editor, Visual Studio Code, kept for me my changes, so it wasn't showing me the updated version of that one. So now again, if you look at this, we have this subtitle which has just this mixin and just the font size here, obviously. So there are just like two properties from a CSS perspective, but when it comes to the output, we already have so many classes. And here is another good example of what you can see. So Sass is generating this extra properties which are vendor specific for web browsers. So they are just creating adding this, so something which we could possibly miss, and something which obviously is good for our web page, because it's just making it more available on other browsers. Now We also can likewise with functions, we also can use an argument in our flex align, in our mixins. So we can define an argument here, like for example, let's say I'm gonna give, well, we could have like direction here, and this center could be direction, or we could have like background, and let's do some simple example. So background color, and this is gonna be our background. Now, what's happened here is that we're gonna get an error because we are calling this mixin without the parameter, which leads to error. So when we add this parameter, it's gonna work, and it's gonna add this background color here to this one. But there is also other way to solve it. So we can define a default value for each and every variable. So we can just specify inherit. So inherit after colon, which will basically, if there is no value passed here, it will just accept the default. Maybe let's do something else. Maybe let's do something more verbose. Let's say red, and the default value will get this red color. So this is how it works. Okay, now let's move to next and final things for Sass in this tutorial, but very important ones, as they are really powerful. And I'm talking about imports and extents. So these are two very useful features of Sass. And obviously, let me know if you have any questions so far. And if something wasn't clear, I will be happy to answer that. Now, if there are no questions, or then let me continue with the imports. So this is another very important feature, and a very useful feature, because like if you remember our previous webinar on Node package managers, basically we as a humans we like some things which are kind of opposite to what machine likes. So what I mean is that we like to have multiple files. So instead of having like one single style CSS file, which is 3,000 lines long, we would rather have separate files for different groups of styles. Like you could have this for divided per page, or divided per element, or divided per functionality or color. So we could have like buttons, or headings or text or whatsoever, and we would just feel better when we split it into smaller files, because it's just easier to maintain, it's easier to collaborate, to work on that with friends, with colleagues, and so on. Oh, I'm seeing again some quality dumps, so just let me know, is everything okay, because I see some warnings from Facebook. And now so obviously it's easier for us to work in that way, and this is another cool feature which Sass allows us to do that. So let's assume we want to add some footer to our page, but we're not gonna keep it here in this main style CSS file, which is already which already have like just 72 lines of code. But let's create a new file, and I'm gonna call it like footer. Footer SCSS. So underscore footer not SCSS, and I'm gonna add some styles over here. So I'm gonna say footer, and I'm gonna say like height let's say we want to have it like 50 pixels, and we want to have this background color to be white. Okay, now in order to use this file inside our style CSS and use it, we have to import it first. So what I have to do is I have to say that I want to add import footer, and note syntax here, because as you can see I'm not using the full file name. Sass, this is like a Sass syntax, so this footer as CSS, and in our style CSS it will basically import these styles into our output file, style CSS file. So then again, as you might remember, we computer likes this compiled code. Computer prefers this single files instead of multiple files, and then again Sass is taking care of it for us, so we don't have to bother with this, and we can keep our styles separated from each other in our repository, which is a great thing, because obviously some other team can work on different elements on this one. And let's see if this works. It doesn't work for some reason. Let me refresh this one. Oh, it's here. Okay, yeah, it's here. So what we need to do, we need to move it down a little bit. Whoops. Let's get. So in order to do that, we just update styles with position. Save it. Success. Oh. And it doesn't work again. Let's see if everything is working fine. This is working fine. This is working fine. So for why this doesn't work? It doesn't get styles applied. Why it is? Class footer. Style CSS footer. Okay. I think it should be dot footer. Yeah, obviously. So now we have our footer down here, down below. Now, this is again very important because when you have big projects or libraries like let's say MD Bootstrap, is what's happening here is that usually you have this files separated, and sometimes it happens, actually often it happens that I'm looking for something. So this is like a repository of our pro component, and as you can see we have all these different files here. So we have different elements and they have all different styles here in CSS, right? And we have this set of imports over here. So this is like the real project looks like. And what is important here is that for people who don't want to use some of these styles from here, what they can do, they can simply comment out this. They can simply comment out this piece of this piece of import like this or like that, and as a result footer will not get compiled into the output CSS file, which will obviously make our file much lighter, and this is something which we are looking for when we are building website, right? We want to have only the meaningful styles. We don't want to load all the styles. We just want to load the styles which are being used at this certain page, and this is what imports allows us to do. So yeah, I mean, this is very cool feature about Sass. We can have a nice structure in our project, and we can have we can have like very complex project, but at the end we can compile just the piece of code, piece of classes which we really want or willing to use on our page. Now it's we can also do the same with like variables, and this is also a good practice. So we could just create the 5 variables as CSS. So all the variables will just go here, and then obviously we need to import them as well, and it will just work. Obviously we're not gonna see it here in the style CSS because variables are not used over here. They are removed, they're scrapped from the final file, but as you can see they are just working, and here in the map file you're gonna see that it uses all these sources to compile this final file. Okay guys, and the last awesome feature of Sass for today is an extend option. Which is as almost everything in Sass, very handy and very useful. And this is because very often we are reusing existing classes. So we have class like subtitle, and it has some properties. There's a question from Grzegorz: why have you put an underscore in the footer CSS and no underscore in style CSS? This is just the syntax it is in CSS. So it just assumes that style CSS is kind of standard, that style CSS is like with the style CSS. So it assumes that this is our main file, and then for the underscore, it's just this is just a nomenclature naming convention like different languages have, right? For example, in PHP, when you include some files, it's like good practice to say like PHP ints as a file which is included. So that will just suggest that this file doesn't work itself, it has to be included. So different languages, they have their naming convention, and this is just how it is with Sass. So just we should just accept it and use it. And obviously if you go deeper, you can change it. There are options to configure, and there are options to for example, change the default inputs file, but it's more advanced and we don't have to bother with it for now. Now, very often we want to have the same class like this one, right? So we have some properties, or that one, like this one. It has some properties, but let's assume that we want to just change the font size of this one. So we want to keep everything as it is, but we would like to just change the font size. So what we would probably do is that we would copy this one, keep everything the same, and just change this one to, let's say, 60, right? And give it some proper name, which again is redundant, and we are like very verbose, copying the same piece of code many times doesn't make sense. And then again, if we change something here and we would have to change this one as well here, so in few places at the same time, which doesn't make sense. And this is against our dry do not repeat yourself method, which you hopefully remember from our previous webinars. So in order to do that and not to repeat ourselves, we can use option which is called extend. So let's say we want to have something which is, I don't know, let's say a smaller than a subtitle, and let's say it's gonna be quote. So we're gonna call it quote, and what we can do, we can just say add extend, provide the selector which is subtitle, and then change parameter, the only parameter we want to adjust, which is a font size in this example. And now let's add this quote over here. So under our subtitle, so let's say we're gonna say it's a quote, and it's a CSS is easy dot period once you know Sass. And as you can see, we got exactly the same styles, just different font size, which is smaller than this one. Okay, and what we have, the last thing we have to do is we need to do some small adjustments to our body. So I'm gonna just update it. So I'm gonna add some background. We need to change a color of background in the variables. And yeah, and we need to do something with this underline here. We need to change something with underline here. By the way, yeah, we need to also change text color to be white. So let's do it in a naughty way. So asterisk. This will make our code white. Yeah, and finally, let's get rid of this text decoration. So we're just gonna say a text decoration none, and it's gone now. And now we just recreated the page from our previous tutorial HTML. Obviously, this is not finished yet, and obviously there are more things which we should actually move to some variables, some mixins. But as for the sake of this webinar, I hope that really get this feeling and excitation at the same time how this Sass is making our life easier. And I hope, and I'm pretty sure, actually, not really hope, I'm pretty sure that once you start using this, you won't be able to write any CSS code anymore in the old way you've been doing this so far, because it's so easy just to nest it under each other, not to remember all these combinators, just to use variables, and then just have these variables and then play with them and just change the single value for your font, and you can really play with it very, very nicely, very smoothly. And this this is what's makes it so amazing. So guys, if you have any questions, just let me know. Let me just remind you about our Facebook group. Let me remind you that all the files are available for you here. And if you like this tutorial, I would really appreciate, this one. if you could just give us stars and likes under these videos, as this will basically increase visibility to others. And then again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us or to post them right now. Then again, next webinars, you can subscribe for them here in the webinar link. And last but not the least, if you missed any of the previous webinars, you can find them recorded on our YouTube channel. There are some questions. I'm gonna get back to them shortly. And just last information is that we already have next webinars scheduled next week. So every week on Tuesday evening, CET time, we're gonna have 3 very cool webinars coming in coming 3 weeks. And the first one's gonna be Vue crash course, second gonna be React, and the last one gonna be Angular. So I hope you're gonna be there with me, and you're gonna see how those 3 libraries, these frameworks, they differ from each other, how we can use them, how we can start our journey using them. And I hope you're gonna like it, and it's gonna be like a very, very good start. And that's basically gonna be one of our last webinars on front-end subject, and then we will be smoothly moving into backend topics. So yeah, I hope, remember, next week, the same day, the same time, the same place. There is a question from Vladimir. The difference between live server and the gulp is that the gulp can minify files. Actually, gulp isn't a server itself, it's a task automation tool. So gulp can, for example, start a live server for you, right? So the live server itself is just a server which allows you to run your web page in a browser, like you've been doing this on a server. So, you know, if we could possibly open this file from, let me find this folder. So we could possibly open this one from here, but then it's using this file protocol, right? It's a file, C users and so on. While here we are already using this HTTP protocol, right? So this is like normal server, which is just installed on our machine, that one. So this imitates for us a real server, while Gulp is an automation tool which allows us to, you know, automate some steps. So the things you're doing but manually, you can do with Gulp with just single script, single action. So, you know, you can have like this pretty complex operation of, you know, compiling our, let's say you are doing, you know, like let's say you are doing some package or, you know, some library you are creating, and then you want to have this light version of your library, right? Which is which consists only of essential code. So you're gonna have like this very essential code, and you're gonna have this like the standard library. We have like more elements, and then you have like super hyper extra huge and fat, you know, extended version which has more things. So, you know, every time you have to compile 3 different versions, you can have this Gulp task doing this for you. So every time it will just get proper configuration, and it just create this like small CSS file, CSS, and this huge fat CSS file with everything included. So the Gulp is automation. It just helps you automate all these different actions, and so we can just compile CSS for you, and you know, then minify them and then run server, or even upload it to your, you know, remote server. But long story make short, Gulp itself doesn't minify. Gulp itself doesn't compile Sass. It's just using external commands like Sass. It's using the external tools, and it just, you know, automates them all together. So this is like kind of wrapping mechanism around different tools, which just combines them all together. Okay, guys, thank you very much for being with me tonight. So many people, it's very great feeling that since it's been already 10th webinar, you are still watching me, and I'm not getting you bored, and hopefully you are getting everything clear. If not, just find me on the Facebook, find me on the Twitter, or post question to our Facebook group. So thank you again, guys. See you next week, next Tuesday, the same time, the same place, and we're gonna be learning how to install and use Vue. So that's really gonna be exciting. Hope to see you next week. Thanks for today, and yeah, see you then.